today's episode is going to be really, really cool because we are talking to one of the giants here in Southeast Asia when it comes to developing video games. Guys, we're going to be talking to Streamline Studio, and with me I have Stefan. And Stefan, before we go into it, I really want to ask you to introduce yourself and what you do in Streamline Studio.
Okay, well, thank you for having me on the show. Thank you very much. What do I do now? I just changed my title. I think the new title is the EVP of Publishing, so the Executive Vice President. So that is a fancy way to say all of the products, all the creative internal stuff is coming to me. So that is kind of like my new portfolio. I used to do kind of like running and building really all the teams in all our locations and kind of like, the partnerships with the different people we work with. But now it's really quite focused on the internal game development side of things. And so that's great, Only took 20 years to get to that point where we can internally do that. More, it's not true actually, not at all. Like, we've been doing games for a long time, but this is actually taking it to another level in terms of the internal investments we've been doing over the last few years. So I'm really happy with having sort of like full dedication to this role now.
Right, that's so cool. 20 years is a long time for you. And I mean, like, just out of curiosity, do you ever get bored or anything for 20 years there?
Well, our industry is so full of drama that it never really gets boring. You know what I mean? And it changes a lot, right? Like, so every new generation, there is, every new console generation, it really shakes up the landscape of development, how you do the games, who is really in the driver's seat. I mean, just look at what's been recently going on. Like, there's plenty of drama with, Microsoft and Sony, everyone buying things, and Tencent making their moves, and then the big questions about like streaming versus PS5 and Xbox and all that stuff, right? And they got Amazon and Google knocking at the doors, but already like Google is kind of bowing back out with Stadia, so it's becoming and going. So this, if you take a snapshot, this is happening for 20 years or 30 years already. Since I was like a teenager, I've seen that, right? So no, it doesn't get boring. It always stays really exciting on that level. And for us, it always was the goal to make games ever since the first game I worked on was in the 90s, right? And that gave us the funding to start Streamline. And ever since then, we've been doing games. I think every 3 or so years, we would release another game over those 20 years, something like that. And would fund that through the services that we've been doing. So stay independent.
That is really crazy. So out of the 20 years, is it just 20 years in Streamline, or have you been anywhere else?
No, I literally have no life otherwise. Like, it's been Streamline since I was literally a teenager. I was 18 years old when I started the studio, and grew it from a bunch of kids in their bedrooms, which is funny because number one is back there, back working from home. It's like full circle. And that's been it, right? Like, I got lucky. I worked on a project that was kind of on the internet. Back in the 90s, it was communities similar to how this studio is. It's not that different, to be honest. Working together, collaborating on a game, programming it, doing art for it and all that. And that kind of picked up. And so Valve came in, the guys in Half-Life and Steam. And they kind of gave us a boot camp in like 1999, 2000 on how to like not die when you launch a game. Which we did, but you almost died. I mean, there's some anecdotes on that. It was kind of wild, when Gabe Newell is kind of like, well, you guys are, going to have a tough year ahead of you. It's like, okay, thanks. But we learned from those guys and then started Streamline in 2000. And, then, of course, 9/11 happened. So it was the best time to start a studio.
What?
But we worked through it, right? And flash forward to crazy projects and multiple locations and 20 years later. And here we are, right? So, yeah, I don't know anything except this.
That's actually really cool. That's actually really, really cool. I was going to ask you about the history of Streamline, but I feel like you covered pretty much everything. But I really wanted to know like the roots and beginnings, like what made you decide to set up Streamline? What inspired that?
Right. I mean, so, I think what it has always been for us is, when looking at the founders, like we're a bunch of like random weird kids, nerdy kids, like that. Loved Star Wars, loved video games. We got one guy, Alexander. He's kind of from a Latin background. First generation American. Maybe you met him. I'm not sure. You mentioned you were going to talk to him in Vegas. Maybe you could meet this like weird German kid. The other guys from South Africa. So we just had a passion for creativity in games and really building things that we would like. And we were always the outcasts. And this was when games were not cool. There were no streamers, there was no like, oh, you can make money with this, or Twitch, or who knows what of all the cultures that have been built around that. It was very, very underground. So you would talk about video games like it was like a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
So, it wasn't how it is nowadays, right? Like where parents are like, you should become a streamer. Like, okay, cool, let's do that. So out of that came a desire to build a place where we would be, amongst people that share our same passions, that speak kind of nerdy, creative culture, and that we always felt early on even that this is a global thing. Like this is not a Europe only or Japan only or any country, whatever. Like we all speak the nerdy language, the geeky language, and that's really what matters. And this ethos has really guided us to find people like us. We started in Amsterdam, essentially, the Netherlands.
Oh, wow.
And, that was always a nice creative place to start a company. That's always been good to do this in Amsterdam. And that it's a very international city, right? Like it's not, just like you must learn this language and you will only meet people from that background. Like it was always very diverse. It was always a bit touristy. Streamline seems to be attracted to countries or locations that are a little bit touristy, a little bit mixed, right? Like Vegas is the other one, KL. Again, we've got beaches here, good food, good people, good weather. So I think we are attracted to the melting pots, the mixes. And so even today, you can still see that DNA of, us random kids. None of us were Dutch, the original founders, right?
Right.
Starting it in Amsterdam. That has kind of perpetuated with us ever since. And so wherever we go, we look for people that share this kind of like, let's do something to make a change happen and be there for each other and respect and accept anyone and any background as long as we can work together in a team and get things done.
Right. So I have a question about that actually, because you guys are just so diverse, so many different people in your team, and you guys started off in Amsterdam. So honestly, how did you guys end up here in Malaysia out of all the other countries in the world?
Well, one thing about the games industry is that it is very volatile. It's quite turbulent, right? So things go up and down. You're making games, then you're dealing with consumers, obviously players. Sometimes they will love you, sometimes they don't care about this game. So you deal with the ups and downs of that. And then on the service side, you are working with companies that are making games, obviously that are min-maxing. Also, their own success. So oftentimes, the price competition can be quite fierce. So, being in Amsterdam in a very touristy Eurozone, country, the pressure was always there to lower our costs. So quickly we actually became a company that really put our culture and like our kind of integration work and our partnership work far ahead of competing on price. So we were never going to be competing on being the cheapest, right? But at the same time, when 2009 hit, the economic crisis really kind of put a ton of pressure on the games industry. We began to look around for, okay, how do we diversify ourselves and looking at where really a lot of the new talent is kind of coming from. And so we began to look at Asia, like we pinpointed India. India was really cool. A lot of engineering talent there. That was really kind of interesting. We looked at China. There was kind of language was going to be maybe a challenge there. Looked at other places. Looked at Singapore for a while. And then we talked to the Singaporeans that had like larger studios here. They're like, well, yeah, all our talent is coming from Malaysia anyway. So we're like, oh, okay. Well, let's take a look at Malaysia. About 10 years ago, came here for the first time, and beautiful weather and good food, and I think a very interesting cultural mix between you get people here like they love Harry Potter, but they also will love Naruto, right? Like so, it's kind of like I hate to say this, like West meets East. Everything's just a melting pot anyway. But like that is a cool sensibility, right? Like I've not just like the anime background or the Hollywood background, but like the merged language of all of it, right? Playing European games, playing American games, all of it together. So that was, I think, very refreshing for us to find that, because when you're making games, when you're designing product, you got to have a reference point to talk about, right? And like one thing that we noticed when we go to China or India, because they are, they were not quite around for like some of the earlier console generations, like they haven't played, maybe the PS1, PS2 games as much, the Malaysians kind of had a head start there, the geek culture was a bit further ahead. So that gave us kind of the point of, okay, we're going to start here with Malaysia. Earlier was Singapore, but then became Malaysia essentially.
I remember that I read somewhere that you guys started off one of like the earlier studios helping out in the AAA title, series, just helping out other bigger companies. And it really put you guys on the map when it comes to a studio. So my question is, ever since you guys relocated here, what made you decide to just continue on just, kind of contributing for AAA titles instead of making your own titles?
Well, like I said, we've always made our own titles, right? We always prefer to, let me say this, we have to make a choice as a developer.
Mm-hmm.
Either you stay independent and you fight your way through and you go to publishers, you get money from publishers. The deals may or may not be right for like retaining, for example, the rights to the IP and everything. But you do that good fight. Maybe you get investors. There's some big boys that go around in the industry, have a portfolio of hundreds of companies. They just buy 30%, 20% here, there. But there are reasons why to do that. So you have to think about, do we want that, or do we say we're gonna fiercely, fight our own way through, which means you can make whatever game you want. You can make it on your own timeline. You can take whatever risks. At the end of the day, if it doesn't work, it's on you. If it does work, it's also 100% on you. Mm-hmm. And we generally have always tended towards that. Maybe foolishly so. Maybe we should have taken bazillions of dollars for giving 30% of the company to someone else. But we've learned over those 20 years, for better or worse, we're maybe not those people, and we like to be independent. Like, it goes back to like we're just a bunch of kids in our parents' house, right, somewhere in the basement, and it is just it hasn't dawned on us maybe like that there's another way. But we've always been independent, and that became our strategy. And because we focused on this kind of like high level partnerships. You're not really competing on scale. Like, you don't come to us for producing 10,000 cups. That's not going to be us, right? You're coming to us probably for consulting, for design, for long-term development, for getting really complicated games shipped. So all of that stuff is really tending us towards just full game development anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that we were always able to catalyze internally our own game development projects coming from this. The truth is we have probably developed more games and then paused them that we've launched at this point, just simply because we're picky and we don't want to launch something that wasn't going to be ready, and then you have to adapt and say, well, because we don't have that 30% investor sugar daddy, the disadvantage is we don't have that money. We can't just push out a game, brute force it with money. But the good part is, we don't owe anyone any excuses or explanations. If we just say, like this game, put it on pause and resume on another one.
Right.
And, this has led us to today, right, where we have, I think, multiple games in development internally and have applied a lot of the lessons of games that haven't even ever really come out, right? That we've learned internally from, so there's the technological investments, architecture that has been put into place, a lot of design lessons learned that are just simply not public, but have been going on in game development at the studio for many years. If you research Streamline, you will find, we've talked about some games here or there, like that never came out, like Unbound and stuff like that, which is an FPS game. And the DNA of those games, it lives on in other titles, right? But maybe a little bit reworked. So right now, where we are at our scale and the way that we're expanding, it looks like we'll continue doing this. And this is very liberating, right? Like that now we're at the point where even like I can actually fully dedicate, my role to this and really kind of handling this portfolio of games we're doing internally. And we're open to partnerships, right? Like we are talking to people that may want to come in on certain titles for participating in that, and the publisher conversations with other publishers outside of us being our own publisher, and that's all open. But because we don't have to do it, it gives you a lot of flexibility for choosing the right kind of partners at the right time. It was a very long answer. I'm sorry. I don't know if that made sense.
No, it's okay. It makes sense. It makes sense. But coming back to what you mentioned was like so many games that were not published and didn't come out. Do you think that you could see yourself in the future coming back to those games and just picking them up again once you have the financial capability to?
Well, that's really a decision for the individual teams and like where the hunger is at and where their taste is at. I think for some games, what happens is you you take the essence and you say, we like the core of it, the stuff around it, like the bad memories attached or wasted effort. We don't want to just the bad juju, just leave it behind. Take the core that we still think is really cool and then apply it in some other thing where maybe suddenly it's like it's like making a dish, when you use it with 5 different ingredients, suddenly like it'll work when maybe before it didn't, right? So I don't think I would force to anyone being like that old thing from 2 years ago, like exhume it, revive it from the dead and then literally build exactly that. But like there was a reason that we paused it, and that reason may still apply, right? Like it generally, isn't going to be funding, but rather like, well, there's a market shift or other products have shown more traction, right? Other things have just moved more organically with more promise. But looking at our portfolio now, I think there's actually a thread that goes through all of the games we've made that leads into the ones we're currently doing. So I think they all contain sort of the legacy of the previous products, which is actually really, really exciting.
So coming back to that as well, this really makes me wonder, as as a consumer, as a person who just views video games, like how many attempts or how many games are made and are never published. Like in your situation, maybe out of 5 games that you maybe try to create, how many actually gets published?
It depends on what you define as a game, right? Like because when you're looking at a finished product, this is probably could be 10 years of from the initial idea of a person to the finished product, right? But of course, it might simmer for many years. It's just like an idea, some documents, some papers, some cool discussions, maybe then it's a first prototype, then put on ice for 6 months, then a second prototype, then you put in a bit more effort, so it's a 2-person team, then a 5-person team, then a 7-person team. So, I think, if you, at any studio, I would say if there are 5 games coming out, there were probably 10, 20, 30 other prototypes, concepts, pitches, maybe more that were just tons. I mean, I think you can ask any developer and, they will, I wouldn't be surprised if they say that they make like 5 times more pitches than they land, right? Just on average, when you look at everything, including what they tell the publishers, right? Like this happens all the time, right? So this is companies that will come to you and will say like, hey, we have this really cool mega movie franchise idea and we're shopping it around for a game. You can put your hat into it. I say like put your proposal into it, and it takes a couple of weeks maybe to make a really good proposal, and then they decided to go with someone else. As an example, this happens all the time, right? So similar processes happen internally as well, where somebody has a cool prototype idea, they kind of churn on it for a while. Maybe turns into a thing, or maybe it doesn't. And the truth is, this is perfectly fine way, in my opinion, for developing games, because you got to look for creative novelty, right? If you play it safe, if everything that is in a pitch becomes approved, then you're going to get very safe proposals. You're not going to get the weird, crazy stuff that might turn into something really interesting, right? So you got to tell people it's okay to fail, right? Like I think the main thing is don't make the same mistake twice, right? Like if you make a certain proposal and it has certain weaknesses in the design, if the same weaknesses are there a year later in another design, then it's like, okay, like we're not learning our lessons here for why we canceled or didn't approve the previous one. But this trial process, this iterative process generally is good. Like our finance guy will say, just went within reason. But that's the case for any studio, I think.
Right. That's very interesting as well, because it really does give a different perspective to the games industry, because I'm sure that many think that you just pick one idea and you just go with it, and it's a very interesting process. So now I'm just really curious about in general, because I was so surprised to find out that you guys have an HQ in Las Vegas. Usually when we hear about gaming studio, you hear about Austin, Texas, we hear about Los Angeles, we hear about San Francisco. Why Las Vegas?
Why Las Vegas? Well, what's interesting with Vegas is that it's close to San Francisco, it's close to Los Angeles, it's close to some of the traditional development centers or publishing centers, driving distance, if you will. It is close to where a lot of the Hollywood movements are happening, and there's a lot of push there for using the Unreal Engine, the Unity engine in non-gaming formats. So there's a lot of engagement there. The other center in terms of business actually is New York on the other side, so there's stuff happening over on that side. And then the considerations of development, comfortable, affordable living that isn't too competitive. And San Francisco as an example, I don't know if you've been recently, but it's kind of rough on the edges. It's expensive.
Yeah.
It's really expensive, and it's not that safe, right? Like they have a lot of problems in the center these days with homelessness and kind of like almost like roaming gangs or something. So I mean, America compared to Malaysia always feels a bit more unsafe in some parts. As a European especially, like. But it's not, I think, what it used to be, right? So it's still very expensive. So again, as an independent, would you go there? Especially nowadays when people prefer to work from home anyway. Like, what's the point of having a downtown San Francisco office? Like, no one's going to be impressed by that, right? Like, there are better ways to spend your money. Now, to be fair, Austin is really cool. Like, I like that. I think that would have been a candidate choice as well. A lot of really cool studios down there, independent studios as well. So that remains a choice, right? Like, there are other places as well. Florida is kind of coming up. Seattle is of course a hotbed for developers, but is very exploding in price, right? Like, I mean, Seattle always has a place in my heart because that's where I started with Valve, right? Like when they brought us in. So I always remember that place for that. But yeah, it's, how do you compete with like literally like Microsoft war chest, in Seattle, so it creates also, inflation in some of the talent, so it's tricky there. So yeah, maybe you look around, you find what works, and Vegas just became it's close to the family for some of Alexander's relatives there. So it's close to where they grew up, so kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm sure the viewers at home are very confused, like Las Vegas, Sin City. No, actually, outside of the Strip, they have really good housing areas, very good suburban areas actually, and it's actually really, really homey. I was actually surprised because when I went there, I was like, wait, this is just so close by the Strip, and it's just really nice housing areas. So I can understand in terms of cost as well. So I can definitely understand now why you chose Las Vegas. So what happens in the Las Vegas side?
So your question was, what are we doing in Vegas? I mean, it's growing. There's a development team already growing there, working on game production as well as Streamline. There's stuff happening there. Those guys are going to work more and more closely with the other locations. Obviously Malaysia is continuing to grow. We have obviously an increasing amount of people working remotely, right? So it becomes very global. We've got a European crew. We've got people across Asia actually at this point, and growing also in the Americas overall, right? Like, if you're in the US, it's kind of a nice time zone. You go north, you go to Canada, you go south, you go into like Mexico and everything else. So there's a lot of activity right now. So a lot of operational, I guess if I had to answer your question precisely, a lot of operational, business level activity in the US right now, especially.
Right, that makes sense. So right now, it sounds like Streamline is like having a takeover around the world, which is really interesting. And you did mention that you guys are going remote. So what are some of the biggest challenges you guys face with, having so many HQs around the world and trying to work together?
Well, for sure, just not seeing each other and being in the same office, it changes how you kind of deal with stress, right? Like, and it affects different people differently. Like, I'm sure for some of our programmers, they're like, I'm happy, I'm at home, I love this, just nobody's talking to me. We don't have the debates of like, artists want lights off, programmers want lights on, talk to each other, don't talk to each other, right? Like those kind of debates on the development floor. At home, you don't have that, right? But of course, you lack that connection sometimes, right? So I think for us, dealing with like how do we decide on the policies of remote work versus going to the office, I think the key ingredient for success is going to be choice, right? So we're not going to be like, we all work from home, like there's no office, you cannot have an office. We're not going to say that. And we're also not going to be like, you all must come to the office. Like it's choice, right? So let the different teams kind of balance what works for them. If they say, 2 days out of the week, we go to the office, we do our meetings there, the big powwows of the week, and then we work from home, or half days in and out, and they min-max around, commute times and things like this. I think that is kind of where we want to be, to avoid the lack of connection, but also again like just stuffing people into an office. We're kind of we're past that, and the kind of partners we have that kind of trust with them that we can work remotely. We have Streamline, we have other infrastructure, and we're investing into people for that, so that works there. And honestly, also we trust our own teams, to work on our own games from home, and if they come back, a couple of days later with the thing done, cool. I don't need to know when they came into the door of the office and left the office. I really couldn't care, right? that is a big change, of course, in a culture from years ago where, it seemed publishers they almost wanted to know that, you really have an iron grip on it. And they kind of would ask invasive questions to us as partners, being like, tell us everything about your people, your access, who's doing what, when, and where. And we're like, you don't need to know this. And so I think COVID has kind of broken that mold completely now, where it's just like, I speak for us, I guess. We don't have this problem anymore. We make very clear that, yes, if the product really warrants it, if the risky, crazy project comes our way that is super, super quiet and secretive, fine, we'll accommodate that. But, it's not rocket science we're doing here, let's be honest. It's not like national secrets of the government we work on. It's entertainment. It's okay, right? Like having a good quality lifestyle for our people, we should prioritize that because we'll work with our brains to be successful here.
Yeah. Okay, so that's very interesting. So let's talk a little bit about what you guys are doing. You guys did mention that you guys have released some games before. And from what I've seen right now, you guys have a mobile game out. And why mobile, actually?
We haven't released a mobile game in years, actually.
That was like your previous one, right? A few previous ones.
It's just, just warm up. You mean Nightstream and Axon Runners? Those were the only mobile games we ever released. Then you've got... the last one we've done is Bacon Switch for Nintendo Switch, as well as PC, and before that we've done Nintendo Wii game, and that kind of stuff. So mobile to us is very much an anomaly, right? Like the reason we did that is, it's good to try. It's good to get a feeling for how it works, and we've learned a lot from it. But the truth is that, I think our DNA is much more woven into just AAA game productions and larger titles, and we had to kind of assess that internally. We're like, we're dependent, we are not mega rich, should we make a bigger game, even if that's more risk, or do we do something smaller? And we said, okay, let's start with the small stuff, because you learn a lot more by doing it, and then you ramp your way up to the bigger stuff, right? So one thing I would say for games is it's more valuable to release games more frequently and learn from them than to work on the same thing for years and years in a bubble, because you don't know what are you doing in some sense, right? You don't really know players, press, you don't know how it feels to even launch something, because it's a huge effort. It's a big pain, to be honest, to launch anything. So learning to launch was a key idea behind releasing these kind of smaller games, right? Axon Runners, Nightstream, Bacon Switch, all small titles, each of them bigger than the previous one. Each of them we have built out more of our publishing architecture in terms of marketing, in terms of self-publishing, right? So Bacon Switch was multiple platforms, not just one, where Nightstream was just I guess Android and iOS.
Yeah.
But every step gets bigger, and now the titles have gotten quite large, right? So we're okay, we are where we want to be, where our DNA I think feels more aligned, which is console and PC titles at this point, and we've also built up our sim ship architecture, which means we are more comfortable launching on PS5 at the same time as PS4, at the same time as Xbox and PC and Epic Game Store and everything else that might be required, right? So getting to that point, we didn't want to live in theory land until we get there. We wanted to do in between things, and so you start small and then you go big. But our ambition has always been larger titles, and so at this point, I think we were the first ones in Malaysia who had PS5 dev kits, churning on them for quite a while already, and so now we have, I can at least out of memory right now, there's 3 games that are UE5, Nanite and all that stuff, and pretty advanced kind of stuff, and then there's a couple of others that are on the periphery. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting when you mention it that way, because I remember playing Bacon Switch. I wouldn't say it was small because, multiple platform is a pain. I heard from developers themselves saying porting is one of the most complicated things to do, actually. So now that, you've created something that's more family friendly, I would say it's more fun than anything. Are we going to be see some darker adult titles from you guys?
Yeah, definitely. What's funny is, internally, our games oftentimes reflect the sort of they are the response to what is happening internally. So it's it goes the other direction. So when we did Final Fantasy, with a hardcore high-end sort of RPG game, we worked on that stuff. Then we've done Sniper Ghost Warrior, which is realistic rifles and deep in Russian territory or something, blowing people up. That creates sort of a saturation at one point, where it's okay, enough of this hardcore realistic stuff. Let's do something ridiculously cute and just silly in the other direction. So it goes that way. Now, of course, people are like, we've been, working with Bacon Switch and kind of, there's other kind of cute product stuff happening at the studio. And we're like, okay, we've done a lot of that very sugary, sweet, kid stuff. Let's go like hardcore, go the other way, right? So that's happening right now for sure, where we're going towards some much more kind of serious games. That release we've done about like the publishing department, there's some concept art in there. That's from one of these UE5 games, right? Like the concept art in that one. So, we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if after a couple of years, the guys are like, enough of this like hardcore stuff, let's just do silly games again. But to be honest, we're anticipating that. And so that's why I'm hoping that our overall portfolio of games kind of caters to both of these, where if people really need to switch from, the more, console heavy, exclusive title, just jump over to like let's call it the Nintendo Switch kind of category of lighter games, you can do that at Streamline. Like you can move between that. Because with people, I think that resonate or they get attracted to one or the other. And I think it's good that we can cater to this, right? Because I wouldn't want to be known for either just one or the other as a studio. Leave too much on the table.
Yeah, that's always really exciting to hear. Obviously, you can't talk about the new game yet. Not allowed to talk about any hints either, are you?
Well, I mean, I guess I could decide to talk about it, but I should have shown. It's also let it simmer. We've learned that, right? Like, let it digest. Like, it's kind of like when a game, you feel there's like some magic in the box. Like, don't analyze it too much. Let the teams kind of run with it. And also, I don't try to disturb them too often, right? Like, more or less, we have a certain rhythm where they have some distance to publishing, and they come back when they feel they're ready for it, largely. And this protects, I think, some of the magic that is in the development stage right now. Yeah. So I don't want to overcommit with things, because you want them to be able to make changes, right? If I say, oh, we're doing this one amazing thing, and then they're like, actually, we think it's not fun anymore. We're doing something better. You don't want to make commitments too early. So let them kind of run with it. But, we do want to be more transparent in the process. We just have to figure out the right approach for that when the time is right.
Absolutely, I totally understand, because I remember that Final Fantasy 15 had a very different launch. At launch, they had a very different feel and look to the game, and then when it came out, it was also very, very different as well. So I totally understand why you decide to go that way. So coming back to my questions here, I was googling up online, and you guys, it was also said that Malaysia is the 21st biggest market for video games in the world. And what do you think drove that?
Well, in basic terms, it's an affluent middle class that came up very quickly ever since the 90s. And that means, playing games, got Steam account, plays console games, and just has a bit of a warm up, to this. I think there's pressure on that, obviously, but now given that, you have a lot of large countries around you, like Indonesia, Philippines, India, that are really kind of ramping up a lot of like young audience coming up. So I think that plays into it, like just having that head start right now for just, being really like growing up with the media already. And that obviously has helped us to come to Malaysia as well, to say like, okay, they get that language of geekdom. So that's why we're here. But I mean, in the end, I think it'll even out across, like I think everyone will play the same games and kind of like speak the same language. So, I mean, that's very exciting where things are going, right?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so you did mention that you are working on your own title, and I think there's like a huge influx when it comes to Eastern games with their own storylines, and you have those Western games with their own storylines as well. Do you think Streamline might be picking up any of the local lore here in Malaysia to make a AAA title in the future?
I mean, it could certainly influence it. I mean, for sure, we want that where you have something that is like global appeal and where everybody in the team can bring in their voice into it. I think the way that our games are getting developed, especially the bigger ones, no single location will be able to fully run that by themselves anymore. It's just too complex, right? Like it'll be always kind of like a multi-site exercise, So I don't know if we're going to have a title that is going to be really defined by the identity of one location. That might happen, right? If there's a really good idea, great story to tell, that could certainly be a thing, right? Like we just have to be a good fit where we say, this is an important story to tell. There's an advocate locally that really drives that understands that it can treat that content with respect and really make that work for a global audience, right? So I would say definitely yes, but I think a lot of that is very subtle in the way that we just let local leaders, let's say in Malaysia, like, the team makes pretty much all the decisions, right? Like, yeah, they are Malaysians, they're Singaporeans, they are Indonesians, they're from the region, so they make the game that they want to make. So whether or not that means that there's a Chris knife showing up in it, I don't know, but rather like it's them making the decisions to do what they want to do, right?
Right, absolutely. I totally understand. Okay, so another question that I have for you guys is, let's talk about talent here in Malaysia. So in terms of talent, if you guys are looking to hire and interested to bring them in here from Malaysia, what positions are very hot right now for your company?
I mean, anything to do with game development, I think is going to be very hot, right? So, design, game design, level design, programming in various capacities, from internship to senior to lead. UI, UX, probably, interface design, user experience will be a thing. We have different kinds of departments in terms of technology as well. So you'll have teams dealing with more like Web 3 technology. You've got, Unity, you've got Unreal, different verticals. So all of that is going to be pretty spicy, I think, for great opportunities.
In general, in Malaysia here, how are the opportunities looking for those looking to work into game development? Because I remember back in my day, I was telling my mom, like, hey, I really want to do game development. I want to be a game developer. My mom said, there is absolutely no way you're going to take that, because there's no job like that in Malaysia. But what about now? What do you think the landscape is like for the country?
The landscape for the country, I think, it depends on what you're looking for. If you want to stay in Malaysia and you really kind of like want to make a mark, right? Like want to get into game design, there are probably only a few studios only that really allow that, because it means, being part of the development, the decision-making process. So that is still relatively small. I think that there is probably push by the government to continue funding independent studios, pushing that stuff up. There's a pretty thriving indie scene, honestly, in the region overall: Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam. Almost a little bit more than what I'm seeing here right now, which is a bit surprising, to be honest. So there's I think there's a gap almost for more indie studios to form here in Malaysia. So I would see that as a great opportunity. For a game design, game programming, big competition in Malaysia is honestly the non-gaming sector. So, going to like Microsoft or, Facebook or, IBM or something, like there's a lot of that happening, where also they're doing Web 3 technology. So that's a bit of a thing. There's that. And then obviously there are some of the art studios here that have scaled up, and, for them, yeah, sure, if you want to do art, then you want to be working on, these mega projects, where there's like 1,000 people, and if it's relevant for you in your career, you say like, I want to be one of those names of these thousands of people in the list. Yeah, you will get that here, and you can achieve that. But there is, I think, a maturing process for a lot of even also artists that have been here in the industry for a while, where that is becoming less relevant for them to say like, oh, I want to put my name in another list, but rather they say, I want to make a mark, I want to be independent. And they kind of branch out. So there's a lot of undercurrents right now where people are trying to make their own games or kind of find their own foothold, leaving some of the bigger studios and kind of re-engaging more creatively. So I think that is a very welcome change, to be honest, to have that kind of brewing under the surface.
Right. Okay, so my final question to you is, what advice would you give to up-and-coming game developers here in the country?
Game developers specifically? Wow, that's an interesting one. I would say, well, try to stay independent. Play the balance, right, between all the big boys. That is going to be to your advantage. I would say do reach out, build a network with other developers. Nowadays, it's really about having partnerships, long-term, working together, that you will succeed. Try to find good terms. Don't be insecure about reaching out to studios you consider your competitors. If you can have a good relationship, you will actually benefit, right? And it can go south, right? It can go very bad, and then nobody benefits. But if it goes well, you actually have someone, another team that potentially you can work on and bigger projects together, right? So that should be something to strive for, which honestly European and American companies oftentimes do, and quite successfully, because there's more work to be done and then there are people doing it, but it has to be done the right way. So I would suggest that. I would say for developers, don't obsess with one game idea, but rather look at a portfolio that will help your entire company succeed and survive and go up, essentially. is if you just focus on one thing, like, you're thinking like a designer, but not like a business. So that might be the main lesson that I would say there. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Stefan, for the awesome interview and an insight on Streamline Studio, because it really just shows how much bigger Streamline is than it just here. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for having this interview with us. So if you guys want to know more about Streamline Studio, do follow them on their pages. They're on Facebook. Where else, Stefan?
Where are we? Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We're quite active. Just look us up and you'll find us. Go to our website, subscribe there, get the newsletters, and we have a couple of programs going on for applicants that we stay in touch with, even if at that particular moment it doesn't work out. We think you're a great talent, you have the right kind of spirit, Streamline material as we call it. We'll actually keep you in the loop and have actually kind of calls like this where we just talk to each other. So
yeah, awesome. All right, thank you so much, Stefan. And for you guys, don't forget to get more information about up and coming developers, games, and everything else in between. We'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.